point, issues that they face. So
Oh, inshallah, it's at 6 till 7 today.
6 to 7, yeah.
MashaAllah. So Sister Sabihah also runs her own show. So last time I was on, the theme that we picked from the Qur'an is, and it was ironically, it ran very nicely as an introduction as well. So the theme that we ran last time was how do we contemplate on the Qur'an? So the importance of contemplating on the Qur'an. The Qur'an itself, yes, it's a book that we can contemplate on, but at the same time, it's a book that also tells us to contemplate on itself. It says, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. It tells us to contemplate on the meanings of the Qur'an, which is very interesting. It's like, do you ever find a book that tells you to read itself?
Yeah.
Right? So that's very interesting.
It's like, I was actually reading a quote, and it's like how the Quran is the only kitab or the book that whereby the author is actually in love with the reader. And normally when you actually like read a book or whatever, it's normally either fictional or non-fictional, and it's just kind of like, sometimes it's just made up, it could be complete nonsense, to be honest, just wasting your time. But I feel like with the Quran, it's just so much guidance that when you read it, it's like in every single verse, it's just nur, and it's just lessons for us to learn.
SubhanAllah.
So
Yeah,
it's
like
just
that's
amazing.
such an important point. It's the only book where the author is in love with the reader. And I think one of the points I mentioned last week was about how it's an author that's an omniscient. So that means it's an author that he knows everything, and he knows everything about us. And when you, I don't know, like those people who have done how to write how to compose story, or how to write a book and things like that, you will have learnt about how it's important to write to your audience. You have to accommodate your writing and make sure it's suitable for your audience. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does write for his audience. But the difference is that he knows his audience better than anyone else knows their audience.
Yeah.
Right? Like when you have another audience, for example, if there's an author writing a book for teenagers, there'll be a limit to how much they can understand teenagers.
Yeah, and how they can relate.
Exactly. Yeah. Whereas Allah, he knows us better than we know ourselves.
100%,
so,
yeah.
Alhamdulillah. So that's what some of the things we talked about last time. Inshallah, today we're going to pick up on two different themes. So I'm on for 1 hour today. It's 2 o'clock till 3 o'clock. And we'll have a break at past, I believe. So the first theme we're going to be talking about is the theme of ihsan. I'll talk about what that means in a moment. And inshallah, the second theme we'll be talking about is the theme of transactions in the Quran, transaction, and the theme of time, and our perspective on sort of life, sort of thing, after the break, inshallah. But before I got started with the theme, I actually wanted to talk about a book that actually arrived in the post today, and I'm very excited about, so which is why I've decided to bring it with me. But actually not just because I'm excited, it's also because it's very relevant to what I'm talking about on this show. And it's a book called Qur'an and Me. It's a journey to deep thinking and reflection. Okay, so it's kind of like a Qur'an journal. And so what it has is, on every page, it's got a different theme from the Qur'an. So for instance, if you can see there, it says grace, it says honor, self-concept, positivity, happiness, thankfulness, indebtedness, determination. So every double page has its own theme. And then on that page, it's got sort of lines where it's got a suggested ayah, so it's got a suggested verse from the Quran. And then after that, it's got, you can choose your own ayah related to that theme. And then you reflect and understand on the ayah. And then you also, you can sort of write about its lessons. You can write related verses, however you want to do it. It's your own Quran journal. At the beginning, it's got sort of a guide of how to use a journal. You can, it's got really good suggestions of like diagrams and things like that. And occasionally it has a page which has, it's got like a break page which has a hadith on it and a different ayah, and it tells you to do meditation or tafakkur on it. So it's a really amazing book, and I'm actually really looking forward to using it, inshallah. On the Facebook page, we have put a link up there, so that's the link to buy this book if you want to. It's the link on Amazon. But also, if you just Google it, if you can't find the link, if you're listening on the radio, it's called, again, I'll repeat it, Qur'an and Me, A Journey to Deep Thinking and Reflection. So Qur'an and Me, A Journey to Deep Thinking and Reflection. It's kind of like a blue turquoise colour with sort of leaves on the front cover. So I'm really looking forward to using that, actually, inshallah. So I think it's really important that we develop our relationship with the Qur'an.
Yeah. feel like the best time probably to do that, if we haven't already, is probably during the month of Ramadan, because like I was talking back in my own show, the Quran ayah where Allah Ta'ala says كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِن قَبْلِكُم. So that was with regards to fasting. And then Allah Ta'ala, when He explains it, when He says شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن, Allah doesn't actually introduce the month of Ramadan with fasting, but He actually like refers it straight away to the Quran. So from that we actually realize that it's something that we need to ponder over about. And just looking at that book, I really feel like I need to buy it myself, because it's something that I know that when obviously I'm reading the Quran, I can look back and kind of like think about my own life, because the Quran it's got the guidance in every single verse, and I just feel like it's something that we can change our life in. But yeah.
No, yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, and that's such an important point. I don't know if I mentioned that last week or not, but thank you for raising that. That Ramadan is the month of the Quran. The first revelation came down in the month of Ramadan during Laylatul Qadr. And the scholars tell us to reflect on the Quran and recite the Quran more in this month. So yes, it's about reciting, and it's also about reflecting on the Quran, using the Quran as a source of guidance, as a source of reflection. So pick up a translation of the Quran, or watch some lectures on understanding the Quran.
There's quite a few tafsir videos as well that are like from scholars that are actually like verified. So I think one of my teachers was telling me that one of the sheikhs, he was telling me that if you go into Q tafsir, it's really, really good, like the way that they explain it. So that's probably that.
MashaAllah, that's interesting. Also, I think the other thing is it called Ma'arif al-Quran, which is available. Ibn Kathir as well. Both of them are available in English. Online, so I think Ma'arif al-Quran is very good, because it sort of picks up quotes from lots of different tafsir. Tafsir is a book that is defined as a book that explains the Quran. It's kind of called exegesis in English, so like an explanation, looking into the deeper meanings and things like that. So these are sort of easy reads that you could sort of try to focus on during the month of Ramadan. I'm going to start to talk about the theme of ihsan in the Quran. And do you know what ihsan means?
Yeah. So ihsan is like, for example, maybe to like do virtuous deeds, or maybe like to be beautiful, or like maybe I remember like learning that it was like a favor, or to be like beautify, like with regards to beauty, so like beautifying the world and stuff. So
MashaAllah, well done. Yeah, so ihsan, good, that's brilliant. The ihsan in Arabic, it comes from the word husn, and it has lots of different meanings according to sort of the context, but some of the meanings that Sabihah has mentioned is to be beautiful, but not only to be beautiful, it's also to make something beautiful, so to beautify something else. Another meaning it has is to do virtuous deeds. So you can see the connection. It's to do something beautiful. So to do a virtuous deed is in essence to do something that is beautiful, to do a beautiful act. So when you want to do a kind act or a good act, it's not just an act of reward, it's also an act of beauty, which if you think about it is a bit different, a way of thinking about it, isn't it? Again, another definition is to bring virtue into the world, and hence beautifying the world. So when you do, there's a saying from I think one of the Sufi saints, who says, when you do a virtuous act, when you do a good deed, you're bringing ihsan into the world, you're bringing beauty into the world. So the way to beautify the world is by doing beautiful acts, which is such a beautiful way of looking at it. Another meaning of the word ihsan is favor, and we see in the hadith of Jibreel.
Oh yeah, we were just learning that recently actually.
Yeah, do you know about the hadith of Jibreel?
So like it's got different parts of like the Islam and stuff. So I think, if I'm not wrong, you can correct me. Where it says for ihsan, the Prophet ﷺ said that أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه فإن لم تكن تراه فإنه يراك. That
MashaAllah, well done.
Yeah, we're learning in madrasa. So for example, it basically means that you obey Allah in such a way that as though you're looking at Him, as though you can literally see Allah. And the Prophet went on to saying فإن لم تكن تراه, that if you cannot see Allah, فإنه يراك, that at least know that Allah is watching you. So just having that God consciousness, taqwa, that comes in as well. I think that's really, really important.
That's a brilliant point. Yeah, so that hadith, the hadith of Jibreel, is a very important hadith. Hadith of Jibreel is kind of one of the central hadith of our religion. It talks about Islam, it talks about Iman, and it talks about Ihsan. So actually what the scholars say is that it's looked at as though it's dimensions. So you know what I mean by spatial dimensions? You have like the x-axis and the y-axis. and then the z-axis, which gives depth, isn't it? So a 3D object has a z-axis, which gives the object depth. So ihsan is kind of seen like the depth of the religion. You have Islam and Iman, which are kind of like the X and the Y, so it makes a 2D object. Then you have ihsan, which adds depth to the object. It adds depth to the religion. Okay, and so ihsan is classed as the third dimension of the religion, and it's classed as something that gives your religion or your deeds depth, because sometimes you can just do you can do a righteous deed and you're just going through the motions, you know. So like you're praying salah, and you just up and down, you're just going through the motions. But to do your salah with ihsan adds depth to the salah. It's to add beauty to it. Absolutely, it's a different level. Absolutely. And so the scholars also say it's to do kindness more than you are required to. So you have, for example, you have the rights of a Muslim over another. Okay, so for example, a right of a Muslim is if you say Salaam alaikum to me, then it's your right upon me that I have to say wa alaikum salam to you. I have to give you that dua back. I have to give you that salam back. It's your right. You can demand it. And if I don't, on the day of Qiyamah, you can say, where's my response to my salam? And similarly, for example, if you sneeze and you say Alhamdulillah, again, it's your right to demand that I say Yarhamakallah. So these are kinds of the basic rights of a Muslim over another Muslim. Again, to host them for 3 days and 3 nights. That's the kind of like a right of a Muslim over another Muslim. But to do ihsan would be to go further than that. So for example, Sabihah, if I just like gave you lots of dua, I said, may Allah give you Jannah in this world and the next, and may Allah, give you success in dunya and akhirah, and make you do that really. and if I make those du'as, that's an act of ihsan. It's not your right. You can't say to me, I demand you to make dua for me. But that's an act of ihsan. It's an act of kindness, and it's an act of generosity. And so that's sort of one of the meanings of ihsan, to entertain guests more than what is required of you, to give charity past your duty. So when we talk about zakah, for instance, giving zakah is, that's your compulsory duty.
Yeah, as far
right?
as you have to.
Yeah, but then sadaqah, giving sadaqah on top of that,
mile,
is the ihsan, is the act of ihsan. And in Surah Rahman, I think many of you who might recognize in Surah Rahman, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هَلْ جَزَاءُ الْإِحْسَانِ إِلَّا الْإِحْسَانِ. Is there any reward for ihsan other than ihsan? So if someone does ihsan to you, then you should reward them back by doing ihsan even more back to them. And in this surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ many times, right? So it's a surah that is repeated, and which means, which of Allah's favors can you deny? And so in this surah, the meaning of ihsan is taken to be the word favor, that when you do a favor to someone else, when you do an act of ihsan to someone else, then Allah will grant you a favor in response. That Allah will reward you with a favor. And what comparison is there with the favor of a human being and the favor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
Completely, yeah. I mean, words wouldn't even be able to describe that, to be honest.
So that's sort of one of the ayats about ihsan. Again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَإِن تَعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا, that if you were to count Allah's favors, okay, you would never be able to count them. So this is Allah's ihsan on human beings. One of the things we were discussing the other day, so, I was discussing this with a friend of mine recently about how the blessing of food, right? Yeah. So we have the blessing of food, and it's nourishing, and as a result of eating food, we can survive, okay, and worship Allah, okay? That's literally, if you think about the function of food, we eat, and then we can like live our lives and have the energy and to worship Allah and to go about our daily lives. But Allah didn't have to make food taste nice.
Yeah, that's so
right.
true.
It could have been like yucky porridge or something, and we just have to eat it, or it's just something that we have to inject into ourselves, and it's not enjoyable.
Yeah.
But actually, Allah's given us so many different types of food, and food tastes good.
Really.
You have like different delicious types of food. There is no obligation on Allah that He had to make us creatures that we enjoy eating. Like it could have just been something that you just
take it, or
like for example, using the toilet. It's not something that you necessarily enjoy doing. You just have to do it. It's just a job you got to do. It's like a chore. So again, eating could have been a chore, but Allah has made it such that our taste buds enjoy eating food, right? And that's such a great blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's an act of ihsan upon us, right? So that's an example of Allah's ihsan.
Yeah, I feel like, do you know what? We're talking about ihsan. I feel like Allah, He's done so much favors upon us that, like you said, it's literally like it's something that you can't count. And like for example, just thinking about it, like you have a shelter, the fact that you're healthy, you're wealthy, or you've got good health, like the hadith about always take 5 things over 5 things. So I feel like that's just things that the fact that you have your parents, like stuff like that, it's just something you take for granted. And I think that's something we need to think about because siblings, family, parents, a house, air to breathe and stuff like that. It's, food, like you said, going to the bathroom, everything. Like, had we not have this, how hard would it have been for us? Like, it's just something. And then when you know how they always say, like, look at the people below you, but we tend to always look at the people above us. So again, that's something
that is so true. Yeah, it's so important to look at those who have less than you.
It's
right?
like, for example, if someone opens a door for you, then what happens is like you tend to feel the overwhelming need to say thank you about 4 or 5 times because you're so happy that someone's kept the door open for you, or just that act of kindness is so nice. But you need to think about how just the way that
It's fine, yeah. So you're right, absolutely.
Yeah,
so
like,
Allah
do you know
subhanahu wa ta'ala
how,
has blessed us with so
example,
many
someone
things.
opens the door for you, you feel the overwhelming need to like reply 4 or 5 times, thank you so much, especially if someone that's not in our faith. But it's just kind of thinking about how many times do we say thank you for Allah for all the bounties that He's given us. Like, even sometimes we feel like, just making dua, like they say, dua is the weapon of a believer, but we tend to find it as a chore, like as if we're going to the toilet or we have to do something. It's a burden. And I feel like when we start to change that, when we start to think about how like it's for our own benefit and it's going to help us, then inshallah our lives will change.
SubhanAllah, that's such an important point. Yeah. So yeah, you're right. We say thank you to people
so much
for so many things.
They just open the door. It's a big deal, but at the same time it's not that big. The fact that you have a shelter, the fact that you're
can never thank Allah for what He has given us, right? So just a reminder to our listeners, you're listening to Ramadan special on Eva FM. That's 102.5 FM. And thank you to our listeners, those of you who are listening. So yeah, we're talking about the themes from the Qur'an, and we picked up on the theme of ihsan, and we're looking at the word ihsan in the Qur'an, and we talked about some of the verses that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the word ihsan. So another place where Allah uses the word ihsan is where it's contrasted, or slightly contrasted, to the concept of justice. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna Allah ya'murukum bil adli wal ihsan. Allah commands you to be just and to have ihsan. So what's interesting is that justice is the thing that's required, right? It's the basic, the haqq, exactly. The right of a Muslim upon the other is justice, right? If I don't give you your right, that would be being unjust. So justice is the basis, right? The basic, okay? But Allah commands us to bil adli wal ihsan, okay? So to have justice, and then on top of that,
go the extra mile.
To go the extra mile and to have the ihsan. Absolutely. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself is just, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on top of that, He is a God of ihsan and a God of mercy, where He gives us things further than we need to. And so the Qur'an has commanded us to do ihsan, to do what is beautiful. And actually there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that tells us that we shouldn't think that acts that are normally considered ugly are in any way exempt from doing ihsan. So for example, acts like, for example, slaughtering an animal. Okay, so if you're going to slaughter an animal, you think that's a very ugly kind of act. It's kind of like a little bit disgusting, lots of blood and gore, and it's not a pretty sight. It's not a pleasurable thing to do, to slaughter an animal. Okay, and so things like this, for instance, the Prophet ﷺ tells us that even things like this, we should be doing so with ihsan. And so what do you think of normal acts then? If even slaughtering an animal we have to do with ihsan, it says إن الله كتب الإحسان على كل شيء فإذا ذبحتم فأحسنوا الذبحة وإذا قتلتم فأحسنوا القتلة. And so the Prophet ﷺ says that when you slaughter an animal, to do so with ihsan, and when you go into the battle to kill, to also do that with ihsan as well. So whatever act it is that we're doing, we should do it with ihsan. And then the hadith that you mentioned, just to reiterate that hadith of Jibreel, ihsan is defined. So in the hadith of Jibreel, angel Jibreel comes to the Prophet ﷺ and he asks him, he says, what is ihsan? And the Prophet ﷺ responds, he says, ihsan an ta'bud Allah ka'annaka tarah wa in lam takun tarah fa innahu yarak. That it is to worship God as though you see him. And if you can't do that, it is then at least know that he sees you. And so the first of all, we talked about ihsan being the third dimension of Islam. And the second thing I want to talk about is this definition that's been given by the Prophet ﷺ, that it's to worship Allah as though you see him. And just as in Jannah, when we go to Jannah, our biggest ni'mah, our biggest blessing will be the vision of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The biggest blessing, our most favorite thing in Jannah will be when we see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just like that, in the same way, in this world as well, nothing compares to the vision of God. What's the vision of Allah? Ihsan. So to worship Allah as though you see him. So that ihsan, there's nothing that you can compare to ihsan in this world. So that comparison that has been made, I find that to be very interesting. That in Jannah, the best thing is to see Allah, and in dunya, the best thing is to act as though you can see him. Yeah. To do ihsan, to act as though you can see him.
That's
like the hadith mentioned.
Think about it, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. And again, it's to sort of to visualize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to fully comprehend your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a way that in a manner that your deeds are fully in line with the wishes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And actually there's a commentary on Hadith Jibreel and the part of ihsan, and it says that an act can't be considered to be beautiful unless it is done with the awareness of Allah. Allah is the criterion for what is beautiful and what is right. So when we do a good deed, how do we know that we're doing it with ihsan? We do it by considering Allah to be the criterion for that. We do it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here's the criterion for what is good and what is considered to be beautiful. And so ihsan can only be carried out when you are doing it with the intention to please Allah. Again, the other thing about ihsan is that although the hadith says, it uses the word worship, it says to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as though you see him, but what has been clarified is that it's not only specific acts of worship. We should be spending our entire lives in worship. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, that human being and jinn have only been created to worship Allah. So our entire life, our entire behavior in our lives and our lifestyle in general should be something through which we're acting as though it's an act of worship. And so if our entire lives is an act of worship, it's when the hadith says to worship Allah as though you see him, it's to live your life as though you see him. So inshallah, we're going to stop here for a little break before we get onto the second theme. And just a reminder that you're listening to Ramadan special on Eva FM. That's 102.5 FM. And we've been talking about the themes from the Qur'an. We spoke about the theme of ihsan in the Qur'an. And last week we spoke about the theme of contemplating on the Qur'an, and inshallah after the break we'll be talking about a different theme. So jazakallah so much to those of you who have been listening, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You're listening to Ramadan Special on Eva FM, that's 102.5 FM. We're live on Facebook and on Twitter and on YouTube. So thank you so much, Jazakallahu khairan, for those of you who have tuned in. We can see quite a few people who have tuned in on Facebook.
That's Aisha and Naeem and Ashfaq and Fatia and Shanaz. So do stay tuned in. And also, if you want to message us or either on WhatsApp or normal message, just ask any questions or your opinions on any topics that we're talking about, feel free to do so on 07450 295 084.
925.
Oh,
Do you want to say again?
that.
Do that again.
07450 925 084. So I'll say that one more time. So 07450 925 084. So keep your messages coming in, and yeah, I'll keep that close, don't worry.
Please do text in if you have any comments, any contributions, about the topics we're talking about. We're doing the themes of the Qur'an, so we're looking at different themes from the Qur'an. Last week we did the theme of contemplation on the Qur'an. Today for half an hour we've just talked about the theme of ihsan from the Qur'an, and now we're going to talk about a new theme from the Qur'an. So Jazakallah khairan, those of you who have joined in on Facebook and on who are listening on the radio or any of the means, please do stay with us, and please do comment. So that's, you can comment by commenting on Facebook, but you can also text in on the number that has just been read out by Sabihah. So you're listening today with myself, Rumaysa, and Sister Sabihah. So both of us, we're talking about the themes from the Qur'an. And so thank you so much to those of you who are listening. It's Ramadan Special on Eva FM. Please do send in your comments, questions, anything.
Opinions, to be honest, anything.
Anything that you'd like to, any contribution. We'd love to hear from our listeners. We don't want it to just be us talking. We want you to contribute as well. So please do text in. That's on Facebook, or you can text in on the number. I'll read the number out one more time. So that's 07450 925 084. And I think you can also text in on WhatsApp as well, isn't it? So you can WhatsApp as well. So just let us know you're listening, or contribute on the topics that we've been talking about. We've talked about ihsan. What are your thoughts on what we've been talking about? Has that been useful? Has it been helpful? Has it helped you to understand the concept of ihsan in the Qur'an? What other themes would you like to hear about? Are there any specific themes that interest you in the Qur'an that you want to talk about? Some of you might be understanding the Qur'an, some people might not understand Arabic. So if you don't understand Arabic, is there a certain word or certain phrase that you might have noticed comes up in the Qur'an so many times when you recite it, and then you think, okay, what does that mean? I want to know more about it. So please text in, let us know. We want to know about this. Recently a sister asked me about, she said the phrase jannatin tajri min tahtiha al-anhar, it comes up so many times in the Qur'an. What does it mean? And so we had a discussion about that, and that was really interesting for her and for me as well, just to retouch on the phrase jannatin tajri min tahtiha al-anhar, gardens beneath which rivers flow. And so we talked about that, it's such an interesting theme. There are so many interesting things from the Qur'an. The words of the Qur'an are limitless. So whatever it is that is your interest, you will find it in the Qur'an. If science is your interest, you will find something in the Qur'an. If arts are your interest, you'll find something related to that in the Qur'an. Whatever your interest is, if maths is your interest, numbers, there's like whole numerology of the Qur'an, and there's themes like that in the Qur'an. If whatever your interest is, the Qur'an can relate to you. So text us in. What do you want to know about the Qur'an? What interests you about the Qur'an? Let us know about those sorts of things. And I think before the break, we talked about a book that arrived in the post for me today, and that I'm very excited about, called Qur'an and Me. It's called Qur'an and Me: A Journey to Deep Thinking and Reflection, and it's a Qur'an journal. So it has sort of themes from the Qur'an written on the side, and then you can sort of write about them, write about the ayah that's sort of related to that theme, and then reflect on the verse. And so I think that's a brilliant way, Qur'an journaling, I think it's called, where you get to reflect on the Qur'an and write down your thoughts. So please do text in what do you want to know about the Quran, and we'd love to hear from our listeners. Let us know you're listening, inshallah.
Yeah, we've got a few people coming on Facebook, so stay tuned in, and you can also message on Facebook as well. So leave us a message about your opinions or
your thoughts on what we're saying. We've just had someone called Hijab Queen join, so Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the show. We're doing a show on the themes of the Quran, where we're talking about so some of the lessons that we can learn from the Quran. So the theme that I want to pick up on now is a theme of the concept of time and transactions in the Quran. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in many places, he talks about the concept of buying and selling. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ اشْتَرَى مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ وَأَنفُسَهُم بِأَنَّ لَهُمُ الْجَنَّةِ. He says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says Allah has ishtara, Allah has bought, okay, from the believers, أَمْوَالَهُمْ وَأَنفُسَهُم, their wealth and their selves, the actual person. Themselves. Allah has bought themselves. بِأَنَّ لَهُمُ الْجَنَّةِ, with the exchange that they get Jannah. So nowadays, when we do a transaction, when we have a bay'ah, which is like a buying or selling transaction, okay, we buy with money, okay, so you have money and then you get the object, okay. So in some communities in the past, when there wasn't sort of a currency that ran, a bay'ah transaction, so a buying and selling transaction, happened between two objects. So, for example, there's a pen over here, okay, and Sabihah would say, I'd like to buy the pen off you, and I'll buy it off you with my mobile phone. I don't think that's a fair transaction. It's not a fair transaction. I think Sabihah loves her mobile phone, but so she would trade for the object with another object. Yeah. So it wouldn't be so much sort of with the currency of finances. Now we have the medium of money, but in the past, if you want to buy something, you buy it with something else that you have.
Like an exchange.
Yes. It's an exchange of two items, and you sort of make an agreement, and I say, actually, I say, well, actually, my pen is really precious to me, and it's worth, a lot more. I'm picking up a big biro pen, actually.
I was going to say,
I'm not picking up any, but, imagine if I could say that, this pen is really precious to me, and Sabihah really, really wants, to buy this pen of me. She'll say, fine, I'll give you my mobile phone, and I'll give you this leaflet that I have, and I'll give you my glasses as well. So if she was to do that, then I'll say, actually, now I'll think about it. So that's how sort of, bartering and transactions were done in some communities. And so in this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the transaction is between what? It's between our mu'mineen, so believers, our wealth and ourselves. Anfusahum, which is our own souls, ourselves. Amwalahum wa anfusahum, and our wealth. So all our wealth, everything that we own. And ourselves, everything that we own, basically. Yeah. We trade that, and what do we get in return? We get Jannah in return. We get paradise. بِأَنَّ لَهُمُ الْجَنَّةِ, and we get Jannah in return. So what's really interesting about this is that if you think about it, our bodies, ourselves, and our wealth don't actually belong to us in the first place.
Yeah, it's not ours.
Right? It's not ours to begin with. So it's kind of like giving a child 50 pence. Okay, so you give the child 50 pence, and then you say to the child, okay, now come and buy sweets from me. So in essence, the 50 pence belongs to you anyway. Yeah. And the sweets belong to you anyway. So you're telling the child to buy sweets off you with money that you've given it.
Yeah.
So this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing. He's telling us to buy something, to buy Jannah, okay, with using our wealth and ourselves. But our wealth and ourselves belongs to Allah in the first place.
He's the one who
He doesn't need to make this exchange. Exactly, He's the one who blesses with it. He doesn't need to make this exchange at all. It's something that should belong to us, and He shouldn't have to give us Jannah in response for that, because it belongs to Allah. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us Jannah in response to this. So when these verses about the transaction were revealed, then all the Sahaba, they started rejoicing. The Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they started rejoicing, and they started thinking, they started saying, this is great. Allah has told us that we just need to give ourselves and our wealth, and Allah will give us Jannah in response. That's amazing. They thought this is a great transaction, a great deal, okay, that we're getting. But it was Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, the companion of the Prophet, who heard these verses of transaction, and he started to cry. He started to cry because he realized that in actual fact, it's such a great honor of Allah that He's calling it a transaction. It's as though he's putting us in a relationship with him, a direct relationship, like a buyer-seller relationship. This is the God of the heavens and the earth we're talking about. And he's talking about us as if we're his, the person we're going to be making an exchange with, right? He's placing us on sort of equal footing in the conversation, which is such a great honor from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it was Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu who truly understood this ayah, and he started to cry and weep. And the other sahabas were like, why are you crying? It's a great ayah, it's a happy ayah. But Abu Bakr as-Siddiq realized how much of a grace and honor it was from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So just to remind our listeners that you're listening to Ramadan special on Eva FM, that's 102.5 FM. And please do text in any contributions. The number to text in is 07450925084. So you can text in any comments, any contributions, any questions, and you can also leave a comment on Facebook as well. So thank you so much to those of you who are listening. So that's the first thing we mentioned about how the concept of transaction. Another thing that's sort of related to that's mentioned in the Qur'an is the concept of time. And how, so when Allah says he's اشترى من المؤمنين أموالهم وأنفسهم, he's bought basically our lives. What does that mean? He's bought our lives. How do we give our lives to Allah? And that is by giving our time to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
I've just seen that we've got a viewer on Facebook as well who just joined. So that's Akil, and we've got Hijabi Queen as well. So make sure that you stay tuned in either on Facebook Live, or it could be on Instagram or Twitter or YouTube's, and keep your comments coming in. If you have any opinions or anything, then do message us.
Any questions? So welcome to brother Akil Muhammad. And just to let you know, we're talking about the themes from the Qur'an. So we're talking about the theme of transactions in the Qur'an. And we just talked about the ayah that Allah has made a transaction with the believers of our souls. So what does it mean when we give our souls to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, give ourselves to Allah? What does that mean? So it means our lives are actually made up of time. Okay, so there's a quote from one of the tabi'een. He says, Ya ibn Adam, innama anta ayyam. You are but a couple of days. Okay, so human beings when we talk about our lives are basically just our time. So giving our lives to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means giving up our time to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, dedicating our lives to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, dedicating every moment that we have to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so that's such an important concept, the value of time. Okay, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears by the passing of time in Surah Asr. It's wal Asr. He takes an oath by the passing of time, by how quickly time passes. And sometimes we think like the days go so fast, and Ramadan has come so quickly, and Ramadan, like I think is it the 11th fast today?
I think so, yeah.
Or is it 12th?
12th. 11th or 12th.
11th or 12th fast. And so we've already had this many days of Ramadan go past so quickly. And Allah swears by this. He swears by the passing of time. And so it's something that we should value, and we should not only just value it, but we should also make sure that we dedicate our time to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's how we can be successful in that transaction. So we made that transaction. Allah's made an offer, okay? And in order to accept the offer and be successful in that transaction will be to dedicate as much time as we can to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's very easy to waste a bunch of time, a whole lot of time on social media, or waste a lot of time on doing whatever it is that you're doing, okay? But it's a lot more difficult when you think about it. Actually, you've got 24 whole hours in the day, okay? How many hours of that am I dedicating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How many hours of my day am I giving to speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to do the things that He has asked me to do, to recite Qur'an, to pray Salah? How many hours? So if you think about it, just the fara'id Salah, the fard Salah, it doesn't take more than an hour to all 5 Salah, right? And so that's not a lot of time that we're dedicating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So think about how can you dedicate more time to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And just the quote I was mentioning earlier on, it's Ya ibn Adam innama anta ayyam. I think it's Hassan al-Basri who says this quote. He says, "Oh son of Adam, oh child of Adam, you are but a bunch of days. You're just days, a few days, okay? إذا كلما ذهب يوم ذهب بعدك." Whenever one day goes, then a part of you has gone. Yeah. So you're losing a part of your life every day that goes past. And if you think about it, we think it's just one day or 1 hour that you're wasting, but really every moment that we have is precious, and we should be spending that time thinking about how am I using this time in a valuable way.
You know what? That actually just reminds me. I remember, I think someone was actually, I think I was listening to a bayan, and it was basically along the lines of Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, and he was just giving an example of how, like, we're so engrossed in our life that we forget that we have such a short time to live. And one of the things that he gave a really amazing example, so I just thought I want to share that. And so what he went on to saying is that imagine that you're in a really, really big desert, and imagine that you just start walking, and you think to yourself, okay, so I need to get past this, I need to get somewhere. So you're walking along it within the desert, and then you notice that there's a lion chasing you. So obviously the first thing is like you're going to start running, because obviously you're literally scared, and you're looking for an escape. So he sees a lion running behind him, so he's running and running, and obviously he gets tired, obviously, even I probably wouldn't, no one's using Bolt over here, but so he got a bit tired, and he saw a well. So he decided that, well, to be honest, I might as well just jump in the well so that there's no lion behind me that's chasing me. So he jumps in the well, and as he's like thinking, oh, I need to jump in the well, he sees there's a snake at the bottom of the well. I'm pretty sure you've heard of this as well, but there's a snake at the bottom of the well. So he thinks to himself, right, so there's a lion at the top, and if I go down, then there's a snake. So either way, I'm going to die, in simple words. So then all of a sudden it says that he sees a rope. Obviously within the well back in the day, there's like these ropes. So he sees a rope, and he thinks to himself, well, one of them is going to get tired. So whenever one gets tired, I'm just going to jump out and, carry on with what I was doing. So he grabs onto the rope, and then...
so now he's hanging in the well, right? He's hanging in the well on the rope.
So there's the lion on top of him. There's a snake underneath him. So if he drops, he's dead. And if he comes out, he's dead. Mm-hmm. So he's literally hanging on that rope. That's his only support. That's literally the only thing he has. And so it went on to saying that, as he was holding on the rope, he saw two mice. One of them was black and one of them was white, and they start nibbling on the rope. And he was, obviously, you can just imagine, like, he's thinking, this is literally going to be crazy, because I have that only support that I'm hanging in the well with, and now someone's, like, the two mice are starting to nibble on that. So, what's going to happen? And then he goes on to saying that, and then he sees like a honeycomb. And he puts his finger in, and he actually just has a little bit of the honey. And he goes that temporarily, that man literally forgot about what situation he was in.
The sweetness of the honey
was just complete. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And then obviously, like, continuing on to explain what Imam was saying, he said that, like, that lion that was chasing him was his it was his life. So it was like the lion that was chasing him was his death, and it was constantly chasing him, because obviously, how you're saying, like, as the day goes, a part of you will go, because that's how your life is. We're only here for a certain amount of days that have been set. So his death was chasing him, so he goes into the well. So now at the bottom, that snake that I said that was at the bottom of the well, that would turn out to be his grave. So depending on obviously how a person is, and Allah Ta'ala judges them, then that could possibly be the grave. And the rope that he was hanging with, which was his only life support, would have been his life. So that's literally his life. And the two mice that were nibbling, the black one denotes the night, and the white one denotes the day. And day and night is constantly nibbling on our life and that support of the rope. So he went on to explain all of that, and the honey was the world, and he just goes that sweetness of the world literally distracted him from everything that was going on around him. So I just think that's such a beautiful way to think about it, because
I love that story.
Literally, it just makes you realize that you're so into the world that you literally forget about what the reality of life is, and that's literally what the whole topic that Imam was talking about was, the reality of life. So based on what you were saying, it's so true. Like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I love that story. It's just, if you imagine yourself, every human being is in that situation where we're hanging on a rope, the rope of life. Okay, so it's kind of like a metaphor. So the rope represents life, and we're hanging on that rope of life, and we've got death basically chasing us. And what's bringing us closer to death or closer to our grave is the day and the night that's eating away our time. And, the way that Imam Ghazali describes it when he says, he eats a little bit of the honeycomb, and as he does that, he gets so distracted.
Yeah.
He forgets about all his troubles. He forgets about the lion. He forgets about the snake.
Forgets about everything.
Forgets about the mice. Forgets everything. And he's so distracted with this momentary pleasure of the honey that's dripping into his mouth from the honeycomb. And so that's basically what we're like in our lives. We get so distracted by the pleasures of the dunya, so distracted by things, that we forget that actually innama anta ayyam, that we just have a very short period of time on this world, in this world. And the scholars say that the most expensive thing we have, the most valuable thing we have, is our time. You think you have like a diamond ring, or you have like your MacBook, or whatever it is, your car, whatever it is that's very valuable and you won't want to lose it. But the most valuable thing that you have in life is your time, because that's one thing you can never get back. You can never get back any moment. So
once it's gone, it's gone.
Absolutely. So choose to dedicate your time to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So we just got a message on Facebook Live by Sister Amreen. So shout out to Sister Amreen, absolutely amazing lady. So salams, both sisters, a great show. Jazakallah khairan for the nasiha and reminders. So
Jazakallah khair, Sister Amreen, for listening. She joined a while ago. We forgot to give her a shout out.
Sorry, we're just so engrossed in the example I was giving.
No, I love that example. Thank you so much, Jazakallah, Sister Amreen. Thank you for listening. Hopefully it can act as a nasiha for ourselves and for the listeners. And so the most valuable thing that we have is our time. And so we should make sure that we value our time, and we use our time most effectively. And in the surah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears by time, he says, wal asr, he says, innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat. Okay, wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. So he says, surely humankind is in loss. So when we're talking about the concept of bay', the concept of buying and selling, okay, if you think about in the sort of business type of transaction, and you think about a loss, right? So Allah is telling us, innal insana lafi khusr, that we're starting off, we're going into the transaction, and we're already at a state of loss. So if you're going to a business and you're in a state of loss, that's where we are. We're in a state of loss. Innal insana lafi khusr. Okay, we're in a state of loss. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes an exception. Is إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. How do we get out of being in loss? We're in debt. Our business is going to die out. Okay, how do we get out of that? إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاسَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاسَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Except those who believe and do righteous deeds, and they enjoin truthfulness, and they enjoin patience. So these are the ways that we can get out of our loss in our transaction with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So our lives we see our lives, they belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we're in a transaction with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that transaction is our giving up of our time. Giving up our lives means what? Giving up our time to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, dedicating as much time as you can to ibadah. So whatever it is that you're doing, make sure that you apportion your day out in a way that you're not wasting time. If you do that, if you apportion your day out, you realize you have so much more time than you actually think about, because it doesn't mean that you don't rest. Okay, it doesn't mean that you don't do nice things, normal things, but apportion your time out. Give yourself, okay, I want to go on social media. I'm allowed
this much
10 minutes or however much you want. This much time on that. I need to rest my body. I've got this much time for that. Then I'll have this much time to do this. If you do that, you'll realize, actually, I've got like so many hours. Yeah. What did I used to do with those hours? Apportion your time out and use your time wisely, and try to use as much time as you can in dedication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we've just had Sam John Paul who has joined, and but we're almost coming to an end now. We were talking today about the themes from the Qur'an, and we picked up on 2 themes today. We talked about the theme of ihsan, which is the theme of generosity and virtue and beautiful acts of kindness. And then we talked about the theme of transactions and time in the Qur'an. And so that's what we were talking about today. Inshallah, we will be back hopefully next week talking about themes from the Qur'an. So please do join us, and please do let us know what you thought of the show, and any themes that you would like to talk about. If there's any themes, particular things you've noticed in the Quran and you would like to learn about them or know about them, please do drop us a text on 07450 925 084 or on Facebook. Leave a comment on Facebook, inshallah. And so thank you so much for being on the show with us today, with myself, Rumaysa, and Sister Sabihah. Jazakallahu khairan. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay. Well done.
Huh?
You speak so fast.